It was the night of October 17th, 2018, when the quiet roads of Interstate 70 near Missouri became the backdrop for a mystery that would leave investigators and the public alike in a state of deep unease. A man whose life seemed to be nothing more than routine miles on the road was about to disappear without a trace. And yet, his disappearance would spark an investigation full of dark secrets, cryptic clues, and chilling encounters that would haunt those involved for years to come. Welcome to Echoes of Fear, your haven for the most terrifying mysteries and the most disturbing true crime stories. In today's video, I bring you real-life crime tales that challenge human comprehension and continue to haunt our minds, even after time has passed. Get ready for a dark and unsettling journey, where the line between reality and fear becomes ever thinner. If you have the courage, settle in. Because today's stories will haunt your mind, and who knows, maybe even your dreams. The victim, David Turner, a seasoned trucker, 42 years old, known for his calm demeanor and reliability. For years, David had been hauling freight across the United States, making the same route he always did, from his home in Kansas City, Missouri, down through rural highways and city streets, transporting goods to various distribution centers. But that routine would be shattered in the most terrifying way. At 9:45 p.m. on October 17th, David made his final radio check-in with his company, Arrow Freight, as he passed through Boone County, Missouri, just outside of Columbia. His voice was calm, his words brief, but he mentioned something peculiar. A strange man had approached his truck while he was refueling at a gas station off Route 63. David had never mentioned anything like this before. Everything seems normal, but there's this guy. Keeps looking over at my rig, he said to his dispatcher. That was the last anyone would hear from him. By the time the clock struck midnight, David's truck was found abandoned just off a rural exit, its engine still warm, but with no sign of David anywhere. His trucker cap, a few personal belongings, and the keys to the rig were scattered near the truck, but there was no trace of the driver himself. The first person to spot something unusual was Carmen Diaz, a gas station attendant who had been working the night shift at Route 63 fuel stop. She was just finishing her break when she noticed David's truck parked near the back, out of sight from the main road. At first, I thought he was just taking a break, you know? Truckers do that all the time. But there was something off that night. It was like he was rushing. His truck was parked too far out of the lot, and the way he was looking over his shoulder, he seemed nervous. And that man, I saw him talking to David for a few minutes. I don't know what they said, but David didn't seem happy about it. When investigators spoke with Carmen later, she revealed more. The man she described was tall, in his early 30s, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. She couldn't remember much about him, but she could swear she saw him walking away from the truck just before David drove off, heading toward the tree line near the woods behind the station. By dawn, law enforcement from Boone County arrived. At the scene, Detective Michael Hayes, the lead investigator, took charge. As he reviewed the truck and its surroundings, he was struck by the eerie feeling of the location. There were no other vehicles on the road, and the woods surrounding the area were dense, casting long, menacing shadows across the abandoned truck. Hayes inspected the rig's interior, finding it undisturbed except for a faint smudge on the passenger side door. It was odd. David's belongings were scattered near the truck, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, and yet something felt terribly wrong. We're dealing with something we don't fully understand yet, Hayes told his team. Whoever took David, they knew exactly what they were doing. As the investigation unfolded, detectives would dig into David's past, looking for connections and motives. They would question his family, his friends, and his colleagues at Arrow Freight, trying to make sense of any potential leads. The more they uncovered, the darker the case would grow. But even with all the evidence, one question lingered in the air. Who was the mysterious man seen with David? And why did he vanish without a trace? The investigation into David Turner's disappearance would uncover chilling details, unexpected suspects, and a trail of secrets that would lead to a conclusion no one saw coming. As the hours passed and David Turner remained missing, law enforcement worked quickly to piece together any information that could explain his investigation with a focus on David's truck, hoping that the vehicle itself would offer vital clues. The first task was to examine the truck's black box, a device installed in modern rigs to record important data such as speed, braking patterns, and any sudden disturbances. When Hayes reviewed the data, he found something unsettling. The truck had stopped abruptly at 10:32 p.m., just minutes after David's final check-in with his dispatcher. But there was no reason for the stop. The truck's engine had still been running, and no unusual mechanical issues were detected. The data from the black box didn't reveal any signs of distress or sudden, violent movements that would indicate a struggle. Something isn't adding up here, Hayes muttered to his team. The truck was functioning fine, and yet David's gone. Who would know how to disable the truck without triggering any alarms? With little physical evidence to go on, Hayes turned to surveillance footage from the gas station where David had refueled just hours earlier. Carmen Diaz had mentioned a man talking to David, but the station's security cameras hadn't caught clear footage of him. The footage was grainy, and the man's face was obscured by the hood. But there was one detail that couldn't be ignored. The man seemed to be walking toward the woods directly behind the fuel station. Upon further inspection, detectives realized the woods behind the gas station connected to an abandoned stretch of railway tracks. The tracks were isolated and rarely used, which made them the perfect place for someone to vanish without a trace. It was a known spot for criminals trying to avoid detection, and it quickly became a focal point for the investigation. The interviews. Meanwhile, Detective Hayes and his team began conducting interviews with people who had been in the area that night. They spoke to other truckers who had been parked at the fuel stop. One driver, Rick Lawson, had been fueling up to David's truck before the incident. His recollection of the events was sharp. "I didn't see much, man," Rick said nervously during his interview. "But I remember David was acting a little off. He was looking over his shoulder a lot, almost like he was expecting someone. That guy who talked to him, he seemed weird. Didn't say much, just hung around like he was waiting for David to finish up." The strange man was becoming a constant thread in the investigation. Several witnesses described him similarly. Tall, in his early 30s, and always wearing the same dark hoodie, which made it hard to identify him further. One trucker, Maggie Lawrence, said she had seen him lurking near the edge of the parking lot before he approached David. "I didn't think much of it at the time," Maggie said in her statement. "But I remember seeing him walk toward David's truck. I thought he was just another random guy, maybe a hitchhiker or something. But when I saw David's face after they spoke, he didn't look like himself. He looked scared." Analyzing the evidence. As the investigation progressed, Hayes focused on gathering more details about the strange man. One of the investigators, Officer John Davis, had come across a small detail during a routine search of the surrounding area. A half-burnt cigarette was found near the woods, just where the surveillance footage showed the man walking toward. It was an important clue, but it didn't lead anywhere immediately. Davis sent the cigarette butt for analysis, hoping for a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the team began examining David's personal life, hoping to find a connection to someone who might have a motive for kidnapping him. They scoured his phone records, looking for any suspicious activity, and found several calls to a number that had been disconnected months earlier. The phone number belonged to an individual named Charlie Hayes, a former criminal who had spent several years in prison for robbery and assault. Hayes had recently been released, and his criminal history seemed to have some strange parallels to the kind of person who might target a trucker. David Turner's name had appeared on one of Charlie's old contact lists, though they hadn't been in touch for over a year. The investigators found this link troubling and decided to investigate further. The breakthrough. On October 20th, 3 days after David's disappearance, Detective Hayes received a call that would change the direction of the investigation. The cigarette butt recovered from the woods had been tested, and the DNA results came back with a match. The DNA on the cigarette was linked to a James Whitaker, a known associate of Charlie Hayes. Whitaker had been arrested on multiple occasions for theft and violent altercations in the past, and he was last seen in the same area around the time of David's disappearance. This discovery led Hayes to believe that Whitaker might be connected to the man seen with David. Came with another unsettling detail. A witness came forward claiming they had seen a blue van parked near the railway tracks on the night of the disappearance. The van had no license plates, and the witness couldn't identify the driver, but they had seen someone loading what appeared to be heavy bags into the back of the van. After days of investigation, the case of David Turner seemed to be at a dead end. The clues were fading, and the only concrete evidence was a cassette tape found in an abandoned warehouse, with David's voice whispering disconnected words. "He is my brother." When Detective Hayes and his team finally traced Charlie, Hayes, David's brother, to a secluded house in Columbia, Missouri, what they found was even more unsettling. The house was empty, except for a single photo of David on the table, with a message scrawled beneath it. "The last trip was mine." In a last-ditch effort, Hayes reviewed the security footage from the night David disappeared. Suddenly, he noticed something no one had seen before. A man, seemingly Charlie, quickly passing by the camera, almost brushing against a parked truck. In the background, something gleamed. A blood-stained knife. The final scene of the investigation took place on an old road near the tracks where Charlie's body had been found, buried strangely and meticulously, as if someone had done it carefully, almost ritualistically. But the real shock came when, upon opening the last recording of David, something changed. The voice, now faint, said, "The man you're looking for isn't the only one. They're everywhere." The recording cut off abruptly, and in the silence that followed, Hayes heard a sound coming from the next room. A familiar step and a whisper. "You knew we weren't finished, didn't you?" As Hayes turned, his eyes locked on the door, realizing the true nightmare was just beginning. Well, folks, those were today's disturbing stories. I hope they've stirred your emotions and made you reflect on the dark mysteries that surround us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chilling tales. And of course, if you have the courage, we'll see you in the next video, here on Echoes of Fear. Stay alert, and sweet dreams, if you can sleep.